So someone asked me on my other video, is Alquist Proft good into a controlling meta or control winter? And I'm going to answer that immediately. It's no. Roll credits. So what's the point of this video? Aside from me trying to farm clicks. In this video, you're going to see the list that I built for Alquist Proft and the reason why I don't think it's good enough. And through that exercise, learn kind of what is valuable into a control meta and how you should be playing into a control meta. And ultimately what you should be looking for from your commander and your deck list to play into such a meta. So let's go back to Alquist Proft. For those who don't know, Alquist Proft is a new Azorius commander from Murder at Karlov Manor. And the important part is that he ETBs with a clue token, and then you can tap him, sacrifice a clue token, and get a Sphinx's Revelation out of him. Obviously, with infinite mana, you can draw your deck and gain infinite life or however much life. At some point, you die if you overdraw, so it can't be infinite life. So the reason why I assume that this person was asking if Alquist Proft is good into a control meta is because Alquist Proft is basically a better Thrasios, where he's also an infinite mana outlet in the command zone. It's a little harder because you do need a colored restriction, which is why I really like Thrasios. If we're talking about classic advantage Thrasios, then Alquist Proft is basically a much better rate for drawing cards because like for Thrasios, for you to draw 2 cards, you have to spend 8 mana or 4 mana with a Training Grounds, which we add the Training Grounds as part of it, which would be 5, right? So for Alquist Proft, because it's a Sphinx's Revelation, by default you spend the white, blue, blue, add your X, which is 2, and for the same rate without the Training Grounds, you drew 2 cards, which is basically better than Thrasios. Then the more mana you put into it afterwards, even better and better, right? If we're talking about like rate of mana that we're spending to draw cards. I think the theory here is that because you can draw go really well in blue-white and you have good interaction from blue, somewhat good interaction from white, Alquist Proft basically lets you play a very controlling game. You're able to spend your resources more because you're able to recoup your resources and also have him serve as an infinite mana outlet, right? So the first thing is to compare him in Shorikai because Shorikai plays a similar role where Shorikai is also a dramatic reversal like outlet from the command zone where you can filter your whole deck and then draw into whatever your win con is. Except the difference is that Shorikai has a limit on how many cards you draw per turn as like your draw engine, I guess. While Alquist just basically needs a large sum of mana, and then as long as you have a clue, you can dump all that mana in and refill your grip, right? So it is pretty different. Alquist and Shorikai are somewhat similar with slight differences. I think neither is really good into a control meta. And here's the part where we start explaining like what's valuable in a control meta. Or recently I have played more cEDH, and I definitely have seen the shift between like what it used to be like a year or earlier this year with like very recent months. So let's talk about the shift real quick and why there's like a control winter. So first of all, I think players are, overall getting better and there are more resources out there. Like my earlier video talking about like what play patterns there are for like blue farm and stuff like that, where everyone knows to like sit back behind a Rhystic Study and like a Mystic Remora and mulligan for that stuff, right? And also understand like how those cards line up with your overall game plan. Like, playing those things so that other players can play into your draw engine so you can draw more interaction to protect your win and stuff like that, right? That has been around for like a very long time. And I don't think the fact that like players are catching on to that has necessarily shifted the meta. I think the cause for the shift is ultimately 2 cards. The first one is the One Ring from Lord of the Rings, and secondly is Talion. These 2 cards together gives most of the strong decks even more reliable sources of card draw that is free after kind of their initial mana investment, which is really, really important. There's like this myth that I like to propagate because I like playing Thrasios decks, is that Thrasios is like a good advantage piece, and that's just like incorrect. Like I mentioned earlier, Thrasios' rate to draw cards off mana is just not good, right? The reason why it's not good is because you need to spend more mana to get more cards. And this is something that I've realized trying to play my Thrasios list into like the meta right now, is that no matter what I do, no matter like what pieces I put down, like Training Grounds, Biomancer's Familiar, all this stuff, get more mana than my opponents, it's never gonna beat Crom. Like that's just the fact, right? Crom is 5 mana initially, but very easy to cast with Mana Vault and Jewel Lotus, and then draws you cards for free. Crom does what Thrasios stands say their commander does much, much better, because after your initial 5 cost, you're drawing cards for free, right? You never ever have to sink more mana to draw more cards. You're never beating Chrom with Thrasios unless you specifically have Training Grounds and Seedborn Muse, and trying to stick a Seedborn Muse is very, very difficult. Let's stop the round of Thrasios. The point here is that there's a lot of really good card advantage engines, like, Rhystic Study, Chrom, the One Ring, Talion, and there's probably something else I'm missing. So we're in a meta where a lot of people have interaction and a lot of card advantage engines, right? Or ways to refill their hand. There is a threshold or a line that a lot of decks fall off under. So Tymna Chrom is above this line, right? Tymna Chrom's the best deck amongst other decks, right? Tymna Chrom's up here and everything else is down here, right? Thrasios decks are down here. There's only one Thrasios deck I think that can potentially compete, but even then it's below, and I think it's Rog Thras. Rog Thras is the best Thrasios deck I've played, but that's besides the point, because today's about Alquist Proft. Important part about this control meta is that players have more resources to exhaust, but not every deck can recoup those resources as good as Tymna Chrom, right? Chrom gets you cards for free. That's the whole thesis of all of this. Tymna draws you cards for free. You could technically play Tevesh to draw cards for free, but you still need to have creatures to draw 2, right? You're never ever beating the Chrom rate. The Chrom rate is literally the best thing out there. So if you're not playing Chrom, you need to have a very good reason why you're not playing Chrom. But ultimately, the point I'm trying to make here is that for you to do well in a control meta, you need to be able to keep parity with your opponents in terms of having resources to spend to interact. You also need to be able to develop your board and have enough mana and momentum to compete with them, right? So knowing all this stuff, looking back at Alquist Proft does give you more resources back, but the issue is you're still facing the initial barrier that you need to spend mana to get cards back. Your rate is better than Thrasios, yes, but you're still spending mana while the opponents you should be afraid of aren't, right? All that said, let's take a look at the deck list. So here's my Alquist Proft control deck, and we're going to talk about how I built this and all the problems with it. And maybe this will inspire you to fix it. So we know the first thing for this deck is there is a combo, which is assembling infinite mana. And to assemble infinite mana, we have Ice-Crown Scepter and then Dramatic Reversal. Where is it? It's over here. So these two together, and your mana rocks infinite mana. Yeah, the other way of doing it is kind of old school. I added Basalt Monolith, and we also have Grim Monolith, and then we have Power Artifact. So this reduces the activation cost of untapping them to give you infinite colorless mana. 2 ways to get infinite mana. You also see the Mind Over Matter here with the One Ring. So because we are playing the One Ring and we're in Azorius, I just figured we want to play Mind Over Matter. It's not my favorite card, but there isn't that many 2-card combos that I'm happy playing in blue-white. So this is just something that we're going to go with. Knowing these are our lines, the next thing we need to do is add cards to help us find these cards, right? So this is why I have cards like Tezzeret the Seeker to minus and get an artifact like the Ice-Crown Scepter itself, or the other mana artifacts to put into play. And then ideally, we have the other part in our hand. If not, we also have things like Spell Seeker, knowing that Dramatic Reversal is a card we're looking for. Ephemerate, in general, I've really liked with Spell Seeker in all my decks, no matter what. I think back in the day, Ephemerate was part of a Final Fortune line that is part of Spell Seeker for Jeskai decks. But the thinking I have behind Ephemerate with Spell Seeker is basically imagine Ephemerate is double kind of Mystical Tutor to hand, right? So if you have a Spell Seeker and you Ephemerate it, you get 2 cards back. You get to put a Mystical Tutor and anything else you want back, right? Which is really, really powerful for 4 mana. You don't always have to find your win con, you can just find more interaction to hold up. So I think Ephemerate and Spell Seeker is just really good. And if you have red, you can always Ephemerate a Dockside. So also, Alquist does have an ETB, so you can just Ephemerate him and get another clue token if you really need it to do your Sphinx's Rev thing. So the next thing is, how do we play into the game? I think Narset's good because there's a lot of decks trying to draw, extra cards. So being able to play a Narset is good to deny them with a draw. The problem of Narset in general, I think, is that the color restriction is kind of hard because you have to tap down 2 blue sources and also to defend it, right? If a deck that had a flyer that was red-blue played a Narset, different story. But the deck that you're worried about does have a flyer and you can't block it well. So the Narset, I think in general, is going to be like a holy day to buy yourself a turn, to deny them a Tymna draw, and also returns cards back to hand. But still not the worst. If they don't have like a way to like threaten the Narset, it could be pretty good. And we're blue-white, so, you know, whatever. Then for creatures, we have Containment Priest for Kinnan and also other things that cheats like creatures in play, but mostly Kinnan. Dranith is just like a good card, we know. Flesh Duplicate, having clones is good because there's a lot of like value or like big creatures flying around. So like being able to play a Flesh Duplicate or Phyrexian Metamorph is just like something that's good in the meta right now. Gilded Drake Steel Stuff, which is good. Grand Abolisher is good. Lavinia, I'm like not really sold on. So Lavinia, I've like went from being really high on Lavinia to like really low on Lavinia. And the problem is like the deck you're worried about, which is like, you know, Blue Farm and stuff like that, or like Rockside, that this effect actually stops. She dies to a Red Blast every single time. The fact that you need to spend 2 mana to play her and your opponent can remove it for 1 is like a really big liability. Like technically Dranith is the same thing I'm saying, except the Rockside, the only way they can answer this is by bouncing it, or if they play Bolt for some reason. But mainly just bounce, while this also catches the Red Blast, which is very like important because most decks play Red Blast. Ledger Shredder I really like in general because Ledger Shredder helps us filter into the cards we need, and I basically play in all my blue decks. Here, we don't have good tutors, so just having a Shredder just helps us dig. Like a Shredder can easily trigger 3 times a cycle, which is three more useless cards you're getting rid of, right? To try and find the right answer or to find the right interaction. Serra Ascendant is like a good card. If we're playing slow and no one hits you because you're Alquist and no one cares, having a Serra Ascendant can like really threaten really well. Solitude and Subtlety are both good because they're both free cards that you can cast. So like the biggest choke point behind most control decks is they run out of mana, right? It's very common to see like your opponent spend half their mana like developing, and then they have like, you know, a couple more colored sources left, and then they tap all of it out, exhaust like a couple free counters in their hand, then they can't interact anymore because they tapped out all their colored sources, right? So having more free spells is just much better, especially if your deck can draw a lot of cards. Thada Adel I like because Thada Adel steals rocks and we like rocks, and just like a good card, I think. Tishana's Tidebinder is a good card, and then Urza's here because Urza can help us turn all our rocks and that one clue into a Mox Sapphire, and also an infinite mana outlet, which doesn't really matter because our commander's already an infinite mana outlet, but being able to tap our rocks is like good enough, I think. There's Safine's Wreck here for funsies. You can probably cut this. Then for our instants, we have Blue Blast. I think every blue deck should be playing Blue Blast. All the best cards you're worried about are red. Most of them are red, right? Dockside, Underworld Breach, all that stuff, right? There's always a target. You can always just kill the Crom too, so like you should always be playing Blue Blast. Born Upon a Wind's like a really good card. Psych-Rift is good. Then we have like just counter spells. I don't know if we should be playing Delay, but whatever. Delay, Doan's Veto, Dispel, Fears, Fluster, Force Negation, Force of Will, Hydro. Mana Drain is cute here because you can turn the extra mana into like a clue if you want to. Mental Misstep makes sense. Pact, we probably need to cut this. Spell Pierce is like fine, and Swan Song. Okay, so let's talk about Surge Salvation. The reason why there's a Surge Salvation here is because there's a really big problem with this deck. This is like the biggest problem with the whole deck. The entire premise of this whole deck is that we generate a lot of mana and either draw a lot of cards or all the cards, right? And the biggest problem is that Orcish Bowmaster is so prevalent in the meta right now because it's so good at pressuring our opponents who are also trying to draw a lot of cards. So there's no good answer Alquist Proft has or Blue-White has to an onboard Orcish Bowmaster aside from literally just bouncing it with like a Psych-Rift or a Chain of Vapor that should be in this deck, or a Source of Plowshares, right? And the fact that our play pattern is more we want to do a big draw is like extra liable to an Orcish Bowmaster. And also on this note, I realize we're missing a lot of really important creatures. Ranger Captain of Eos, and also Esper Sentinel. Silly me, playing all the bad cards, not the good ones. And let's just say Chain of Vapor too. Let's get rid of Dovin's Veto. Let's get rid of that Dispel. Or Delay. Yeah. Oh, we're getting rid of this. An offer, we're doing it live. An offer you can't refuse. Okay. So that's another big problem with Alquist Proft and other decks like this. It's just like you're dependent on the draw. Like you're really dependent on the draw, and other decks are also drawing a lot of cards, and the decks that hate on those decks will hate on your weaker deck, which is a big problem. Okay. So for our artifacts, we're not doing anything too special. We have signets just to like fix our mana and also just like get colored mana, and then just like our Ice Crown Scepter and our other One Ring. We also do have Imposter Mech as another way to copy a creature at a pretty good rate and also hard to remove. So if someone has an Orcish Bowmaster, you can copy that. It's harder for them to remove and cause a problem for them. Yeah. For our enchantments, we do have some hate pieces like Rest in Peace because we don't deal with our graveyard. We have Seal of Cleansing, which I like. So the reason why I like Seal Cleansing is that it just puts a slightly more difficult roadblock for our opponents with Underworld Breach or other things like that, where if it's on board before they have that, they have to basically bounce it or not pull off their Underworld Breach combo. So it's like a little more annoying kind of like removal. Back to Basics I think is good in just any low color deck, so we should be. Touch the Spirit Realm is important because it goes through Grand Abolisher, so you can channel and like blink the Grand Abolisher or blink whatever else is like problematic, but getting rid of the Abolisher is important to let your opponents or you interact with your opponent. I like Steel Enchantment here. It's really funny because Steel Enchantment basically lets you steal a Rhystic Study because everyone's playing a Rhystic Study. So for 2 mana, I think that's a pretty good rate. So here are our lands. We have Ancient Tomb and City of Traders to power out our mana rocks quickly, fetch lands, all that stuff, nothing too special. Inventory Fair is fine because one of our combo lines does involve, or both of them involve like an artifact, so another way to find it is like kind of good. And then we have more basics because we have back to basics. And then, yeah, that's basically the whole deck. I don't think this deck is like that good for all the reasons I stated above, but it's cool. So if you're into it, you can take this list and try and make it better. Probably will. But keep in mind for all those problems.